Hello and welcome to this episode of The Inner Estate with your host, Bridget Stuart. And I'm thrilled today to introduce you to Dr. Andrea Lein. Dr. Lein, I am thrilled to have you as our guest. Thank you for joining me today.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I want to introduce everyone, not just your chosen career, but certain elements of it that I think could impact all of us, especially as we're coming up on the holidays. So you are a doctor, you are a positive psychologist.
Yes.
And I find that really thrilling. And I want you to explain more about that. And in particular, you have gifts you're going to share with us today about microdosing joy into your life. So I'm
Yes.
going to turn this over to you. What can you share with us and why are you passionate about this?
Yeah, it's such a wonderful way to start the conversation because I think most people, even in my field, we tend to think about psychology, and in the Western world, we think about, sort of what is wrong, right? How do we diagnose problems? How do we fix the things that are intruding in our life, our mental health and well-being? And I started on that very traditional path. So I've been in the field for, goodness, over 25 years now. And when I started, my PhD is in traditional clinical psychology, school psychology. I sort of did a dual program in that at the University of Virginia. And as I was beginning my graduate program, the field of psychology, right, it's sort of like late 90s, early 2000s, there was a man, the APA president at the time, said he sort of charted this new course. And if we look back in history, even prior to that, there were people talking about these things, but he sort of made it official that the field as we know it, at least in America, we were going to start focusing on what he called positive psychology. So why don't we study what actually works well in humans? Like, why don't we study happiness and joy and flourishing? So that opened up this whole new field. And while I had just started this program, literally learning how to diagnose, learning about, psychopathology and all of the disorders and all of the things that you normally get taught in a program like that. So I did all of that. I worked as a clinical, school psychologist and a therapist for a lot of my career. But from that point, even as a student, I thought, this is actually my calling. This is actually what is resonating with me. So I have been studying, integrating it into my work and teaching it for decades and applying it to my own life. So I'm so passionate about it because I think we get mired down sometimes, and I can relate to this with looking at what's wrong in our life and trying to fix it. Not that there's not a time and place for that, but with positive psychology and what I like to help people do is it's just like a reorientation. It's like shifting our gaze from the mess to, oh, look what is already here right now, the beauty, the meaning, the purpose, the joy. Sometimes it's very hard to see, but through decades now of positive psychology research, we know there are actually tried and true ways that can help people. Whether you're what I like to call sort of like in a blah state, you might not call yourself depressed. You might not
Right.
have diagnosable clinical depression, but you might not say, I have robust mental health or I feel, vibrant and flourishing. You're like kind of in that gray middle, like blah. I think a lot of us can relate to that. The statistics during the, pandemic were many people were dealing what we as psychologists call languishing. It's really sort of the absence of mental health. It's
Right.
a little different than, again, on the spectrum of clinically diagnosable disorders to on the other end of the spectrum, like really robust mental health. So it's sort of that in between. It's just sort of not great, but not dire.
It almost sounds like surviving, but not thriving. I know that's a little bit of a
Absolutely.
cliche, but that's what
Yeah.
pops to mind as you were describing it.
Yes. And those phrases, a lot of people like now things have become very mainstream. So things like thriving and not surviving, or things like gratitude journals and all of the things that have trickled into our mainstream life now, which I think is beautiful, didn't exist 15 years ago. And when I was, starting in this field, I was teaching about gratitude and all of the interventions that we know in positive psychology. And now it's all picked up speed. And of course, we've commercialized a lot of it, and for better or for worse, but it's spreading. But most of those things have their roots in the research that started in the early 2000s in positive psychology. And it's just now more people are talking about, which is great.
I find it fascinating, and I'm really glad to hear that's happening. I will share, I'm known for being candid. I didn't always find myself necessarily attracted to that field of medicine because I did feel like there was a lot of focus and emphasis on the negative or the loss or the difficulty and the challenge. And I'm not saying that those things aren't real or they're not there. Of course they are,
Right.
right? But I sort of had an arm's length relationship with your field because
Hmm.
I felt as if the focus was almost too much there.
Yes.
And so I'm thrilled that in these last few decades, there's now this other avenue and path
Hmm.
that is focusing on positive. It's so how would you when you look at your overall field, and I'm not expecting you to pull a number out of a hat, but how
Hmm.
many psychologists are shifting or leaning into the positive psychology versus the traditional clinical?
Yeah. I don't know statistically. I would say, though, in my experience, and I also contribute, I'm a contributing scientific writer for one of like the top website for professionals in positive psychology. So
Hmm.
I know sort of behind the scenes, not just mental health professionals, but coaches, even
Hmm.
teachers. The research of positive psychology has infiltrated, which I find wonderful, into business. It's actually even
Yes.
infiltrating into, we use the research now, not just looking at the individual well-being, but what about there's a happiness index that they look at comparing
Yes.
countries, right? Nations and cities. And so I would say over the last few decades, even though I don't know exact numbers for, say, psychologists
Right.
per se or therapists per se, I think that there is a more natural integration or tendency for even people who are working in a more traditional, like I was before, very traditional, doing
Hmm.
trauma work. I've worked in mostly in the past residential treatment centers, which is like, a lot of people are familiar with outpatient therapy maybe, but residential treatment is like for people who need even more support. So very intensive.
Correct.
But what is beautiful is that I worked with people, young adults, adolescents who in a lot of other areas, the professionals said to their families, we've tried everything. We've tried all the medications. We've tried all of the therapies that are supposed to work. We've tried everything. And the families are like, nothing is helping. And
Mhm.
then in my experience, sometimes that helps for people. Wonderful. If it helps you, great. You go on your way. But for those who
That's
it
right.
didn't help, you have to take a different approach. And so I love the challenge of saying, how do we take actually a holistic approach, structure an environment, which you can do in residential settings because you're sort of in charge of everything from the food they
That's
eat
right.
to the
Yes.
activities they do. And so using what we know, not just integrating the positive psychology, but even things like in functional medicine. I am not a functional medicine doctor, but I hired a functional medicine psychiatrist to come on board to help wean these individuals off medications that they weren't doing anything. If they had been, they would have felt better, right? So we weaned them off the
Right.
medication. We structured and we gave them opportunities to form deep relationships, because that's important, right? To find purpose and meaning in their everyday life, for especially with adolescents who are like, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm just stuck in my parents' basement, playing video games, right?
Yes.
We
Yes.
give them opportunities to learn and do differently. And lo and behold, it does take time. It's not a quick fix, but lo and behold, they rise into that identity rather than being fixated on you're damaged, you're broken, you have 5 different
That's right.
diagnoses, you need to take these medications for the rest of your life. So I saw that with my own eyes, and it is so inspiring. It gives me as a professional such hope because I know what is possible. And I do think that a lot of people in my field, not because it's their fault, they actually don't always get to see that drastic change. And
Right.
so, yeah, I've had the opportunity and the privilege to see really remarkable, beautiful, major change in people's lives without relying only on this sort of what I think is a little bit of, I'm going to say antiquated. I'm sure not everyone will agree with me on that, but a little bit of an old school medical model where we just open up the DSM and we have all these categories and you fit the checklist. And so we're going to give you this diagnosis. Well, that doesn't always tell
Right.
us exactly what really the root cause is. And the way I like to think of positive psychology and the difference and that shift in our field is the same thing with if we think about our medical system. And again, there's a time and place. We need surgeons and we
Of
need
course.
antibiotics
Yes.
for certain things, right?
Absolutely.
There's a time and place.
Yes.
But if we don't also focus on what actually is the soil in which health emerges, like what are the components where physical health emerges. We have to study that so then we can actually tend to that soil in our life. Make sure we're having, make sure we're getting enough sleep, make sure we're eating whole foods and, hydrating and all the things that we know now people talk about. But it's just the same concept in positive psychology. We're not ignoring that hard things happen, traumas happen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yes.
But so how do we tend to the soil? And actually, how do we tend to the soil even preventatively with our kids, even on a cultural level, so that they have more hope to build that resiliency at an earlier age that maybe we didn't get to do because of the culture we grew up in. So to me, it's just such a field of possibility. And I'm so optimistic that, our mental health crisis is not getting better in America by throwing more of the same of what we've been doing for decades. So we need a paradigm
Right.
shift. We have to do things differently.
And I'm so, yeah, it's very exciting that your field is having this groundbreaking swell occurring with both
Mhm.
research and engagement and people leaning in on it.
Yeah.
So tell me, as one of the top, I believe you said, contributors to the number one website in the field of positive psychology for professionals,
Mhm.
can you tell me a little bit more of what you do with that? And you mentioned it's opened up to even coaches and people that are not necessarily psychologists. So,
Mhm.
what could you share with that? If someone's listening and they might be a coach or a manager or a sales trainer, is there
Yes.
something there that they should check out?
Yes, absolutely. You can just Google positive psychology. I'm sure it's the top website that comes up,
Hmm.
positivepsychology.com. They have a blog, so there's a lot of resources and free resources on there to start. Tons, 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 tons.
Perfect.
If you want to take a step further, like if you are a coach or like I said, even teachers, other professionals, and sometimes people, just individuals, they have some resources that you can purchase and you can go through a program or even a shorter, not like a whole course, but something a little bit shorter, a little bit more digestible. And you can buy that
Right.
just for yourself. If you just,
Nice.
you can just go through it. So, but it is geared more towards professionals so that they can use those tools in their work.
In their practice.
Some people are using it again, even in group workshops. So if you're
Hmm.
consulting with organizations and you want to pull some of this in. So it's a wonderful resource. I before I started writing for them, I was using resources both in my organization that I led and individually, clinically, and in group settings, like across the board. I believed I was integrating it top to bottom. I was like, from the top, from leadership and
Right.
staffing, we have to, because it all trickles down. We can't
100%.
people you can certainly apply it to the individual, and that's very powerful. But when you start layering it, and it's not just the individual, but now if you're a leader listening to this and you say, okay, how can I apply this organizationally? We know it is such an investment in the organization, and we want to look at the bottom line. And I say to my husband who works in the corporate world, I said, if more leaders, if more CEOs really understood the power of this, I want to go in every business and just say, I want to shake, because it seems soft, right? It seems like the kinds of things we're talking about, like with microdosing joy. That's a great example because it can feel a little fluffy and it doesn't seem like the things that we would necessarily apply in a business or corporate environment. But the businesses and organizations who really understand the power of it know that it absolutely affects the bottom line. And I wish it didn't always have to be that's the metric, but I understand. I understand, but it really does, right? So if everyone in the organization is not just, when we talk about feeling more joyful or happier, it's not about just the feeling. Any of us can probably understand, and we've had this experience, that when we're in a really good mood, our thoughts are clearer. We come up with creative solutions to problems
Yes.
that have plagued us or the organization. We
Yes.
collaborate with people, right? Things spring forth from that fertile soil of positivity. When we are feeling stuck, even emotionally, and we're just sort of blah, or maybe
Hmm.
even worse, right? We're really struggling. I know from my own life, when I'm in that kind of state, it's like I can't think. I just can't think clearly. I can't access that creativity in the same way. So it's
Right.
selfishly for me, I'm like, how do I start my day every day with as much, and again, not in a toxic positivity way. You always have to be really careful about this because
Yeah.
it's not about
Right.
denying the bad things. Absolutely not.
Correct.
It's not about denying it, but it is choosing and orienting and having agency in your own life every day to say, okay, how do I show up? Because when I can choose how I'm going to feel for the day, there's this we call it the upward spiral of positive emotions.
Hmm.
More positive emotions beget more positive emotions. And the same thing is true in the opposite direction. It's also contagious. So if you're the person in your organization that can like bring it in and bring the joy and bring the, even if you're not like an ebullient person, that's okay. You don't have to be the jokester. Not everyone's personality is that, but your presence brings a sense of peace and joy and people just feel good around you, right? Like we like to be around people that are like that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And so there is a connection between those positive emotions and how our mind's cognition work. And so that benefits an organization for sure because we want creative solutions and we want problem solving and we want to be able to collaborate as teams and it all works together. So it's very powerful. Can you tell I'm
It is
I'm a
funny.
proponent?
Yes, I can. I can tell you're very passionate about it. It fits in very neatly with a lot of the concepts that I embrace as a coach and just as an individual. And one of them, well, two of them popped to mind while you were talking. One is that what you focus on expands.
Yes.
So if you're focused on positivity or joy or happiness or a
Yes.
success or
Yes.
something that may have seemed like it was going to be a failure and you saved it and then you kept going, like when it's framed in that manner,
Yep.
as you said, the positivity builds on top of the positivity.
Mhm.
And then I also incorporate that go where you're strong and
Mhm.
make that stronger.
Absolutely.
And so, if someone is out there listening to the two of us, they might be thinking, well, both of these ladies sound pretty happy. And they may feel as if they're starting at a different place. In my mind, and I'd love your opinion, it almost doesn't matter where you're starting from. If you can give yourself the gift of allowing yourself to have a moment of awareness of where you
Yes.
are starting from, and no matter how you feel
Mhm.
or what you're thinking about yourself or what you're facing. Because as I said, neither one of us are saying that there's not hard things and there's not trauma and there's not loss and there's not grief.
Absolutely.
We're both saying that is there. I think, and again, I'd love your opinion. I feel like
Mhm.
if you can have that moment and just know where you're starting, even if you make that small change, you can start.
Yeah,
That, am I on the right path there?
100%. And what I wanna say a couple things in response to what you do in your coaching and that sort of mindset. I think a lot of people, especially if you're someone who reads books or listens to podcasts, where you're learning and you hear these ideas, it can sound to some people like, "Oh, that sounds very woo-woo." Like, "Just focus on the
You're
positive
right.
and it'll expand," But what I love, and I blend a lot of the spirituality with science because I'm very science grounded, but I'm also just personally a very spiritual person. And they don't compete. The science
Correct.
backs it up. And that's what's so beautiful about this research now that we've had for decades and more coming is that what some of us have been doing now we know, oh, this is how it works. This is actually what's happening. And there's theories around it and data. The reason why I'm reflecting on the part about if someone's listening and they're like, okay, well, these ladies sound real happy. And I don't feel that way. The reason why, and I feel like this is part of like the call on my life to spread this message. It would be one thing if I was just like, oh my gosh, I had this beautiful, perfect, wonderful life. My
Yeah.
childhood was perfect. 20s was great. I've just
Yeah.
never had any issues. I'm so happy, right? Like people would be like, good for you. Good
Yeah.
for you.
Yes.
But my story has been absolutely, absolutely not. And if you had met me 30 years ago, when I was a teenager, I was severely depressed. I was contemplating suicide most days for about a year. I don't even remember because it was such a dark time of my life. I didn't think I was going to live past 18. Literally couldn't envision or think about life past 18 because I just had this feeling like I'm not going to make it. I had a lot of really challenging, chronic, challenging childhood issues. And it's not about that, but I just share it because people meet me today and they're like, wow, you're just so hopeful and you're just so joyful. And I'm like, if I can become this joyful, peaceful, hopeful. I would have never imagined it when I was 18. People would tell me, I had professors and people would say, you're really jaded for being so young. I mean, I was like, wear all black,
Hmm.
listen to the sad music. I mean, I still like listening to some sad music sometimes, but I was very stuck and I didn't see a light until a moment that changed my trajectory. And it was not like my whole life changed overnight, because it absolutely didn't. And then I went on into my 20s and 30s and still had a lot of really hard things,
Yes.
like we all
Yes.
do. And I just feel like my life has given me a million opportunities to practice choosing to turn and reorient myself, to practice, even though this is like a horrible mess and it's horribly painful and it's horribly whatever it has been, to see, okay, where do I take one step from here? Where do I find the
Yes.
light? Where do I find the beauty? Where do I find like, even if it's so minuscule, I can, or even if it's just a friend or a mentor or someone who just in a moment says exactly what I need to hear to like pick myself back up and keep going. That is the process. And I
Yes.
just know it's possible. Like I said, I saw those young people make changes in their life in a couple years that it took me many more years to make, but I didn't have
Hmm.
someone guiding me. So that's why I'm so passionate, because there is some research, and actually I don't know what the most recent research is, so I'm going to say it with a caveat, because my gut tells me, and maybe it's just me being super optimistic, that I'm like, I don't know. I think anything's possible, because we know now the brain and everything is it's much more malleable than we thought in the
Than we
90s.
previously thought.
We
Yes.
thought that things were fixed. Once things happened, that was it, right? And now we have study after study just showing that's not true. Even for things
Mhm.
like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and right, like we just, until we know more, we just don't know. So
Right.
I think that there has been research that says we all kind of come in with a certain set point mood wise, like, or happiness wise. And then, we can
Right.
make it better, but like maybe someone does just come into the world. You look at babies. Some babies are like happy-go-lucky babies, and some babies, their temperament, not so much. So there is some research about that. But I still think I don't believe in such a deterministic view of the world. I guess that's what it comes down to. There might be some things genetically and things that happen early on that make it feel impossible for people. But I don't think anything's really, truly impossible. I think there's support needed. I think resources, I think creativity, and, but I think for many people, there's more change that is possible than what
Possible.
we give ourselves as humans some credit for. We kind of feel like, or we think it's possible for someone else, but not for
But
me.
not for us. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That'll work for all of them. However, not for me because of XYZ. And
Yes.
that's when people have limiting beliefs like that about themselves, that must make having breakthroughs more difficult
It does.
in your work.
It does. I remember, and I think that's why people sharing their stories is really helpful, because I think, and what I love about podcasts, or, certainly in the past, it was through books or other means, when someone hears a story, like for example, someone may hear the specifics of my story, like if I give a talk, and then for that person, they're like, oh, I see myself in her. Like in my story, at 19, I became a mother unexpectedly. And that changed the whole course of my life and what I thought was going to happen. And not many single, teenage moms end up to like go get their PhD. Like I didn't have
Right.
anyone
Right.
around me that was like me doing that. Not a single person. Not that there aren't other people out there who have done it. I just not
Right.
not in my life and when I was doing it. And so I just had maybe like a delusional belief that I was meant to do this. And even though no one in my family had even graduated from college, I did not come from a background where I saw that it was possible, but I just had this little, who knows what it was, this little bit of like belief. And I remember thinking, either people think I'm crazy, like either I'm crazy, or I have such weird level of belief that I am meant to do this. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I am committed and I'm going to find a way. And actually, very hopeful people and resilient people, we call it pathways thinking. So hope is not just, it's not just the feeling, but like I said, then it can change the way we think. So we start to find pathways to the goal, whatever it is. It might seem completely impossible, but people who are strong in this, and maybe I didn't have the words for it when I was 19 years old, but somewhere in all of my very depressed state, there was just this little bit of glimpse. I mean, I will attribute it to God planting that in me. It was like a little gift that I don't know where it came from, but
Right.
just that, there's this pathways thinking. So it is a strategic way of like, well, if this path doesn't work, and for me, it was like, well, I thought I was going to graduate from college and then go straight to get my doctorate and finish by the time I was 23. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. Once I had my daughter, I was like, well, maybe I need to readjust the timeline and maybe I should, do this and that. And so the timeline did get adjusted. And I didn't know exactly what the path was going to look like, but I just took certain steps. And if one door closed, I looked for what's the other potential pathway to get there. That's the power of hope and pathways thinking, is that we continually look. People who don't have that muscle built will get the door closed on them for whatever and just say, well, I guess I can't do it.
That's it. Right.
That's it. And they stop themselves. So I think the power of people sharing their stories is important because it could affect, impact someone maybe believing, oh, maybe I could do it. And I also think for people like us, coaches, therapists, a teacher, again, a parent, when I was working with adolescents and they were like me, that's why I loved working with them. They were like my adolescent self, like angsty, feisty, real jaded, some of them. And I
Hmm.
love those. I love the really, feisty ones. And I just remember this one young girl in particular, and she was self-sabotaging left and right. Like I could see so much potential in her, and her family could see it. Everyone could see it. She was like a bright light in the room, and she just kept sabotaging. And under the
Right.
core of it was, once we got under there, I knew it was like, because she doesn't believe she can. And she had some learning disabilities that were sort of, driving some of those. She had some past experiences and teachers saying certain things to her, unfortunately. And so I was able to say to her, you might not think this is possible for you, but here's my story. And I had the benefit of saying, I have worked with several other adolescents who had even worse situations and grades and whatever it was that she was saying, I can't do it. And I could say to her, I watched them do it. And so sometimes we have to carry the confidence or the hope for someone else. And that's what encouragement really is, right? It's like we have
Right.
the courage, we're giving it to someone else that they don't have it
Right.
in the moment. And that's the power of relationships. And that's another, a pillar of in positive psychology, what we know. People who live not just long lives, but happy, healthy lives have very rich, diverse relationships over the course of their life. And we need them. We need them like we
Yes.
like oxygen and water and sleep. So,
Well, I'm going to preemptively invite you to be a guest on the show again because I believe you and I could possibly have a great conversation around the current loneliness epidemic
mhm.
in North America, America in particular. Um, because I would love to hear any thoughts or creativity you have around what's possible if each one of us take one step. Could we create change in that area?
Mhm.
But it's really it's intriguing to me that your industry is having this huge wave of change and it's having such a big impact and all the happiness studies. I had the privilege, I lived in one of the happiest towns in America because I lived in Santa Monica for quite a long
Yes.
time. That
Yes.
was one of the cities that was
Yep.
studied and ranked high, books written about it. I now live in Paradise Valley, Arizona. Love that too. I haven't
Nice.
looked to see where it falls. I'm going to guess
Yes.
that's probably pretty high as well. But it's funny that we have things like that. And at the same time, this loneliness epidemic. So if
Yes.
you'd love to come back, I would love for us to have a chance to talk about
I would
that
love
sometime.
to. Yeah, thank you. I would love to. I'm so,
But
yes, very passionate about that. And I do think it's just we haven't, there's always a lag. So we know the studies, but
that's right.
we're entrenched. That's what I mean. We've been entrenched in a certain way of doing things.
Right.
And while I think sometimes when I read news articles or hear reports of like, oh, we need to, the way we're going to end this crisis or help this crisis by training and hiring up many more therapists. I'm like, that's wonderful. That's great. But you know what? There will never be, because, in other countries, and there are creative people providing creative psychiatrists going to Africa. They have issues there too. And they have this, I can't remember the name of the man who started this program, but it's called like a yellow bench program. And they would take
Okay.
grandmothers. They said, who can we use? Where are the resources already there?
Right.
We don't have trained mental health professionals. And they would pair grandmothers who had a little bit of, some training to sit and just listen to someone else. And
That's right.
what a beautiful thing. And
I actually heard about that program. I
Yes.
loved it. I found it fascinating.
We need to get out of this box that the only way we can solve mental health issues is with only mental health professionals or only psychiatric drugs. It's
Right.
not worked. We have to have a complete paradigm shift. So yes, I do think we're sort of hopefully at a tipping point where more people, and maybe even this wave, I think since COVID, more people are just talking about mental health, and they're talking about,
Yes.
self-care, and everyone's talking about these
Yes.
things that therapists have talked about for a long time.
Right.
That is one part of the phase of transition. And then I think as people begin to take more ownership and say, wait a minute, what can I do differently? I think part of the obstacle in our culture and in America particularly is that we just do like the easy button. We want the quick fix. We do. We're like, if I have
Yes,
to
we
wait
do.
a minute longer, I need to DoorDash my food, and I need to, like, we want things so fast. And so what we know works, it's not fast, but it's deep,
Right.
and it's long lasting
And meaningful.
and
Yeah,
powerful.
and significant.
Yeah. So
now I would love it if you could share with everyone the concept of microdosing happiness or microdosing joy, because we're airing this in December. Hopefully, people are also listening to our conversation and being a part of it next year. But as people are coming up on the holidays, I thought, what a great tool and what a gift you could
yeah.
give them. Early Christmas gift. If you
Yeah.
could share how people could microdose joy or microdose happiness for themselves.
Yes.
Would that be okay?
That's great. And the holiday seasons I love the holiday seasons, but I also know, it comes with a lot for most of us,
Yes.
especially women.
Yes.
And I work primarily nowadays with sort of high functioning, high capacity women. And as a high capacity woman, right, we can do all the things during the holidays, particularly. So the concept of microdosing happiness, actually, so I had contributed to a piece that was just recently in Women's Health magazine. And so that was the title of the article. But, and this concept has been spreading for a few years now, again, getting that out into the mainstream. But sometimes we think about happiness as like this, this destination in the future, something that we're striving for, and we don't necessarily feel it fully now. So maybe one day, and maybe this thing will get, or maybe this great vacation will get, we just think of it as something, this thing we're waiting for or hoping for, like this big thing that's going to bring us the happiness. Or maybe it's the job. Or maybe it's, fill in the blank. Microdosing happiness or microdosing joy is the concept of how can we, and this is part of like the rewiring the brain and the practice, doing a little bit every day actually is going to be more effective if we really want to rewire that brain than waiting every 4 weeks or every 4 months for some big thing to like, oh, now I feel happy.
Right.
Especially in the holidays, a very simple thing we can all be practicing. I will be practicing it, is daily look for, just again, reorient. It's not that you have to avoid any of the hard things that might come up for you. The stress, maybe grieving if there's loss in the family. It's not about that, but it's in the midst of it. Where are those little moments that bring, I call them like the beautiful life moments. They could be so simple, and they're usually free. They're usually free. We usually don't have to pay anything for them. We just have to pay attention to them. And that is the reorientations. If you're not in the practice of it, then you might want to structure it a little bit more. I say, like write it on a sticky note at the end of the day. Like, what did you notice? Or put it on your phone, like start an app, start a little note on your phone where it's like a gratitude practice in a way, but it's actually like, what just brought me a moment of joy? Even if it's like, oh, I got to see my granddaughter stand up for a moment, and she's 6 months old and she's so proud of herself. Like, it's just a moment, but let it receive it. I think that's the key. Like, let it in, let it impact you. Notice how it feels, savor it as much as you can, and then write it down. And then at the end of this holiday season, look back and say, there may be a lot of other things that happened in December, but it's a beautiful thing when we can look at our life and say, there's a lot of hard things in the world going on. So many hard things. But in my everyday life, look at all these beautiful things that happened. And it does bring us more joy. And that there's a ripple effect. And share it. Share that idea with a friend. And I just think that's part of what we can do to impact and have a greater impact in our culture. That's very simple.
I think that's incredible. And it is something, when I think about that concept, I call it bluebirds. I don't know why, but I say, oh, it's a little bluebird popped into the day. And you're right. It could be anything from hearing a favorite song on the radio that I haven't heard in forever. But you're right. It's because those things are happening all around us all day.
Yes.
But it's whether or not we choose to say, I love this song. Oh, I haven't heard this in so long. I'm going to turn this up. And you kind of close out anything else. You don't answer the phone if a call comes in, and you just let yourself think, yeah, it's the acknowledging it that I
Yes.
think has a bigger impact on our brains. Or actually, and you're the doctor, right? I am not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. But I think it has an actual impact on our brains. So you
Yeah.
tell me if I'm
Yes.
incorrect.
Yes. Well, and that's what I mean. I think most of us can feel. We might not know exactly what's happening, but we feel it. Our bodies feel it. There is an expansiveness that happens inside of us. We can feel, even if we don't exactly have the words for it. And when we feel it in someone else, you also notice it, right? When someone
Yes.
else is having an experience like that and you happen to be around them, you pick up on it. So it's a tangible, it's a real thing. It sounds a little like woo woo again. It's like, because we don't have the words for it, but it is exactly what's happening. It changes the brain. And I would say part of that expansiveness, I won't go into a whole teaching on this right now, but part of that expansiveness, when I think of expansiveness, my hands are on my belly right now. Like, it's sort of deeper in us, right? It's not a mental thing. It's a body
Right.
thing.
It's a body thing.
It's a
Correct.
body
Yes. So
thing.
our whole
We
body.
feel it.
The whole
And
body
so
changes.
when I say it rewires the brain, what I really mean to say is that it's rewiring our nervous system, and our brain here is connected to what we often call the second brain in our gut. All of that is connected. And the more we do these things like meditation, noticing beauty, practicing gratitude, connecting with a friend, all of those things help build that connection between this brain in our head and our gut brain.
Second brain.
And there are more receptors in our gut than in our brain. So it's amazing. So when we feel it, that's the science behind it. We feel it down here. We don't feel it up here in our brain.
That's right. And it's funny. You just made me think about that saying. When we face something really devastating or disappointing, we say it's a punch in the gut. I don't know why that just
Yes.
popped into mind. And it's probably because that is where the sensation actually hits first.
Yes. Yes. Well, once we start learning all the neuroscience about it, that's what's so beautiful is that you start looking at some of the phrases, old phrases before we knew the science, or, just like spiritual disciplines, ancient, like ancient wisdom, right? Or biblical wisdom or whatever. And you look at it with new lens going, they've all been saying this all along. I'm not saying anything new. I'm like it's nothing new. It's just sometimes with the research backing it, with the data backing it. For some of us, we're like, okay, well, now maybe I'll give it a try.
Well, Dr. Andrea Lein, I have been so thrilled with this conversation. I think you and I could keep going on and on. I want everyone to know that if you would like to reach out and learn more about everything that you're doing, including your podcast, which is, give
The
us the
Power to
title and where
Flourish.
they can find it.
Yep, I
The
just
Power to
launched
Flourish.
Power to Flourish, which is what it sounds like. It is geared towards women, but I do have male clients as well. And
Mhm.
the information is for everyone, but my heart at this stage of my life is really to support women in particular, because I do think we have we a particular kind of power and impact in the world. And I just want to help unleash that in more women. So you can find me in that new podcast, The Power to Flourish. You can find that anywhere podcasts you listen to them. And my website is just
Excellent.
my name, Andrea Lein, which is spelled Lein. And you can come find me on Instagram at Dr. Andrea Lein.
That's incredible. So I do want to extend that. I hope that you will join me again in the new year and we could continue exploring some of this exciting breakthroughs that are happening in your field, which is really impacting all of us, not just psychologists and not just the patients directly, but it can really impact all of society.
Yep. If we're
And if
human
you
and health.
are Yes, if it's human. Yeah, if you're a human, this we would have something here that would help. And if you're listening to us today on the interstate, I hope you'll return as well and join us for another episode. Thank you again for being our guest, and everyone have a great day.